Empirical equation correlate California bearing ratio, CBR, with dry density for granular soil. Abstract: in this study a 12 test results of CBR test granule mixed soil was taken from soil laboratories, and a statistical method was used to find out a relationship between the CBR and dry density of the soil, desiring to obtain a straight line relationship and a formula combining the previous two variables. A reasonable straight line relationship is obtained, and CBR could be founded directly by using the formula predicted in this study. In other hand, the laboratory time and efforts are minimized. Keywords: granular soil, California bearing ratio, CBR, dry density, least squares methods. 1. Introduction. There were many soil tests, and these engineering tests were taken place for many engineering purposes, and there were one or more manners to test one of the engineering features of soil. P.N. Canna, 1979. These manners have founded because of the improvement of the used equipment and scientific progressing. Behaya, 2007. CBR test. One of these tests which can find out the pressure act on the soil related to the California soil capacity. CBR test took a large field in civil engineering designs and especially pavement designs. It was an empirical test found and improved by Porter, then it was used by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1942, and it is considered the first test in world which gives right and considerable results. Besides the pavement designs which depend, CBR test was practical and suitable, so it was depended by American Association of Standards for Test and Materials ASTM, Leelopthema, 2005. According to ASTM, 1,883 results of the soil test completed after at least 4 days, ASTM, 2004. In this study, the data collected from the laboratory tests for maximum dry density and California bearing ratio, CBR, for a number of samples were taken to obtain a relationship between CBR value and the maximum dry density of granule soil. Statistical method by linear regression was used to correlate these variables in an empirical equation may be used to find out the value of CBR from the value of dry density directly to minimize the time and efforts. 2. Sampling. 12 samples of 2 granular mixed soils, Class C and Class B, were chosen. Cooperated with Babylon Central Laboratory and Engineering College Laboratory, having a laboratory test results for their maximum dry density and corresponding California bearing ratio, CBR. Non-real samples were excluded, aiming to have realistic results. Table 1 shows sieve analysis for the soil samples, and Table 2 shows the maximum dry density for the 12 samples and the corresponding CBR testing results. The statistical method can be used to fitting straight line equation objectively by least squares methods. Since that we can obtain number of lines from the data values, least squares method principle states that the series of observations can be fitting with a best line that the sum of the squares of the departures, the difference between the line and the observed data values, are at minimum. The departures of the dependent variable are usually used and the relationship has the equation. For discussion. 1. Referring to the figure, 1, the relationship between CBR and maximum dry density is trends to a straight line, that means linear relationship. 2. From figure, 2, CBR can be found directly from the graph or from the line equation obtained. 3. It is possible to use the equation obtained to determine the amount of California bearing ratio, CBR, of the soil by knowing its maximum dry density, d, without delay when performing a laboratory test. 4. It can also be used in the other direction to find out the appropriate maximum dry density, d, when determining the required California bearing ratio, CBR, by delivering the soil to the appropriate dry density for it. 5. The time, for days, and the effort of the CBR test according to ASTM 1883 are minimized in this study, and CBR value can be obtained directly. 6. This study was taken place and it is might to be reasonable depending upon what the CBR test according to ASTM 1883 is an empirical method to obtain CBR. 5. Conclusions. This study obtained a linear regression equation between California bearing ratio, CBR, and maximum dry density, .d, for the granular soil having acceptable summation error percentage of 0.165, with correlation coefficient of 0.9935, and standard error of estimate of 0.9935%, as a following formula, equals 7.777. 132.734. Where CBR is California bearing ratio and .d is maximum dry density. The time and the efforts of finding out California bearing ratio, CBR, for the granular soil are minimized. 6 recommendations. In order to obtain an equation that can be used more widely so that it can be applied to other types of soil, i.e. non-granular, cover a wider range, it is recommended to increase the number of soil samples and their types. It is recommended to include soil particle size as another variable in more spacious concluded equation.